Alright class, my name is Mr. Nick Cooper, the English Language Arts 7 through 12 teaching certificate applicant here. I'm going to talk about the Associated Press writing style, the AP style of writing, essentially newspaper style of writing that we'll be using for our journalism class and any school newspaper, things of that nature. And once I get going, if you guys have any questions, please do not hesitate to raise your hand and ask the question. So before you start writing a story, we have to ask ourselves, what can immerse the reader and why will they want to keep reading? What are the things that we need to A, draw them in, B, keep them reading, and C, have them finish the story? So I think the very most bare bones important thing that you have to have is an understanding of the 5 W's. Essentially, what connects the story? Why are we doing the story at all? So, if anybody knows one of the 5 W's, raise your hand and let me know. We'll start with who. Who is the first W? Who are you writing about? Who is it? Who was in the news? Who is important to this event? So that's our first W. Second W is what. What happened? What are we writing about? What's the big deal? What does the reader need to know? So that's the second W. Third W is when. When did this happen? When did it happen in the course of the events between one story and many stories down the line? When was the story in the sequence order? So knowing when is very, very important as well. Number fourth W is where. Where did this happen? Why does it matter to me? We need to know where it happened to draw the reader and maybe have a sense of connection with the location. So was it in our own state? Was it at the government level? Where did this occur? And then the fifth W is why. Why is it important? Why did this happen? Why do we care? The fifth W may be the most important. The why. Why are we doing it? Why should I keep reading it? So always remember the why. So who, what, when, where, why are 5 W's. So now that we have a sense of an outline of what makes a story and what makes a reader want to keep reading the story, we want to know how to get the reader's attention, how to draw them in. How do we draw them in? Anybody, any ideas? Feel free again to raise your hands. I think number one, what's the first thing that you see? You see the headline. You want to have an attractive headline, something that has a keyword of what we're talking about in the story. If we're talking about football, we can talk about football in the headline, something of that nature. But we want to get straight to the point with the headline. We want to give the reader the information that they believe they'll want to read. So if somebody likes the Detroit Tigers, I would be kind of drawn in to see Tigers win 5 games in a row or something like that. So seeing that keyword, seeing something that the reader connects with, can give immediate connection with the story. But again, we want to keep it to the point, semi-short, and really just draw the reader in to read the first 2 sentences, which are called the lead, which then will lead to the rest of the story being read by the reader. Now the lead, which is spelled L-E-D-E, and it's kind of weird. The lead is the first 1 to 2, very, very rarely 3 sentences. The lead should give a good amount of the W's. Who did this happen to? Who's in the story? Who again, are we reading about? What are we reading about? Why does it matter? Why did it happen? And where did it happen? And I'll tell you, you really want to sell the 5 W's straight away and then dig deeper into each of the 5 W's the farther down that you write. I found that another thing that really draws a reader in is a strong quote from a person that's connected to the story or that you may be writing the story about, such as maybe a feature story about one of your favorite recording artists, sports stars, what have you. So just like a quote from somebody that is connected to the story. Now, what we have to think about in forming a story is how do we do that? Well, we do that with the inverted pyramid style, which is essentially like a pyramid upside down. So the base sitting here, you want to have the most important information straight away. Right in your lead, you want the most information that the reader can read and automatically know what they're reading and then want to know more. So straight off, the most important information that you have straight up front. As you move farther down, you describe further, and then you give greater and greater detail until you get to the bottom, until you've exhausted the entirety of the story and or event that you're covering. So the inverted pyramid style, once again, most important, detail, 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 and then wrap up at the point down at the bottom. You want to be as in-depth as you possibly can and really just dig as deep as you can until you get to the first and second to last paragraph, where you essentially wrap it up with the very nitty-grittiest, most details. And essentially that will give the reader closure. Now, speaking of multimedia elements, that'd be photographs, it could be videos, it could be podcast audio, or infographics. Anything that's multimedia related, something that's not purely just written word. There are some quirky things about that as well in AP. Look, we'll just talk about photography for right now. So when you take a picture is worth 1,000 words, yes? Yeah. So in AP, they don't want you to have to just sell without describing what you're seeing. So in AP, it's called a cut line, which is the description underneath of a photograph. And that has to once again have some element of the 5 W's. So who, what, when, where, why. It could be like 2 kids playing in the street, playing basketball. You could say on this date in this location, kid A and kid B play basketball and the winner gets ice cream, something like that, something silly, but not silly. Just descriptive and straight to the point, just describing what you're seeing in the photograph. And then when you take a picture and you just label it, it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. Well, you actually need to give credit to who the photo was taken by. Same thing goes with video elements as well. But with photographs, it's called a credit to or photo credit, something of that nature. As a freelance photojournalist, there's a sense of creativity as to how you want to have your name be labeled on both your story and your photographs. So I would do photo credit / Nick Cooper, or Nick Cooper photo credit, some derivative of that, some sort of just this photo is from, and then that person. So very important to have that on there, and that's one of the things that makes up a story. Once you have a story written, your name's connected to it, that story is by you. And so as you grow your journalistic career, one of the things you want to have is a background. kind of like a resume to look back at it. You want to have stories that are written by you. So each story has a byline. That story was by Nick Cooper. So that's one of the important things to remember as well, because you want to get credit for the work that you do. Am I right? Yeah. Any questions? Anyone? Okay. Now we want to talk about the kind of some punctuation, names, numbers, things of that nature. So in AP, the first time you appear that somebody's name appears in a story, you want first and last name. And that goes with every single story. You have to have first and last name on first reference in a story in AP. On second reference, so it's the second time that you mention somebody's name, you only go with the last name once you've identified them by the first time, the first full name. You just don't want to be redundant in AP's eyes. Now, any questions on that? Okay. So as we look at that, we'll talk about names of months, talk about how to break down a year. So with short months, such as May, it'd be M-A-Y. So when you reference the day, it'd be May, June, July, whatever month it may be. So you would spell out May because it's a short month, M-A-Y. Now longer months like January, February, December, October, November, August, those longer ones, those need to be abbreviated so you're not taking up too much space and kind of making the reader's eyes go glazy. So for January, it'd be Jan dot. So that's abbreviated. And that's all you need. February, Feb dot. Same thing. And then so on and so forth. For all the names that are more than 5 letters long. So June, you spell it out. So any questions on that? Again, longer months, abbreviate. Shorter months, let it fly. And we're talking about the day of the month. So not the day of the week, not Monday, Tuesday, all that, not that. When we're talking about the day of the month, and we're talking about, per se, the first of the month, we would do, let's just say, January 1st would be Jan dot 1. And no ST. So just Jan dot 1. So that would, for the reader, it's January 1st. So AP does not want you to do the ST. Again, kind of a quirky thing, yeah, but that's just how it likes it. When we're looking at, let's continue with the numbers. When we're talking about numbers from 1 to 9, we're actually going to spell those out when it's not related to length, which I'll get into in a second. So from 1 to 9 would be 1 would be O-N-E, 2 would be T-W-O, 3 would be T-H-R-E-E, and so on and so forth, all the way up to 9. But then once you hit 10, you got 2 digits, and AP wants you to do just purely the number. So it'd be 1, 0 for 10. For 11, it'd be 1, 1. So once you hit 10, just go to numbers. That's all you have to remember with that. So again, 1 to 9, write it out, spell it out. 10 and beyond, just go with numbers. One thing about AP and punctuation itself is once you hit 1,000, so 1000, AP requires you to have a comma between the 1 and the 0 that separates anything from the thousandths on. So essentially it would be 1, comma, 0, 0, 0 for 1,000. Does that make sense? All right. And now that we're on the subject, we'll talk about lengths and how we do those. So for, let's say, if we're measuring 10 feet, we would do, what would we, would we spell it out or would we do the numbers? You're right, we would do the numbers. So it'd be 1, 0, and then it would be a dash feet. So essentially you're connecting the unit of measurement and the number. So the number and then the unit of measurement with the dash in between. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. And then I guess the last thing for now, we went over quite a bit here. The last thing that I'd like to talk about is the really quirky thing called an Oxford comma. So, anybody heard of this? Yeah, I hadn't either, not until about 2 years ago. So essentially, when you're listing things, so let's say just these 3 pictures, Point Betsy, Frankfurt, and Cherry Bowl. So in APA, the style that we write in class here, it'd be Point Betsy, comma, Frankfurt, comma, and Cherry Bowl. However, in AP, you take out the last comma, which is kind of weird. So it'd be Point Betsy, comma, Frankfurt, and Cherry Bowl. Notice there's no comma in here. Yeah, so that's one of the quirky things, but we went over quite a bit here. So we'll revisit this another time. However, let's just rehash what we went through again. What do we need to even write a story? We need the 5 W's, right? Yeah. And they're who, what, when, where, and why. So we have those 5 W's there. And then we need an H. Anybody know what the H is? How. H is how. How did this happen? So yes, we have the 5 W's and an H. And then we have the headline, again, attractive, but short and descriptive. Then we have the lead, again, L-E-D-E, the first 1 to 2, rarely 3 sentences to open a paragraph, to open a story. And then we want to quote, because we want to get the word from the person who has actually been in the story, who's been affected by the story, if at all possible. And then in doing this, in crafting our story, we want to do the inverted pyramid style. So in that structure, the inverted pyramid structure, again, we have the most important information first, and then we get detail,